Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. A bill that would remove protections to the water quality of the Buffalo River Watershed is now in the Arkansas Senate after passing committee. You might remember that more than a decade ago, the state spent more than a few $1,000,000 to move a commercial hog farm that was discharging millions of gallons of waste into that watershed. Ainsley Platt with the Arkansas Advocate News Service is in Little Rock and tracking this legislation, and she joins us now. Welcome, Ainsley. Good to have you with us for this segment.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the motivation for removing the moratorium. Isn't it likely that another big hog farm would move in or something like it?
Well, I can't say whether or not a hog farm would move in if this moratorium was removed, but what I can say is that this has a lot of roots in the kind of a right to farm doctrine. That's kind of what the Arkansas Farm Bureau has cited in its opposition. There are concerns that have been cited by the legislators that have introduced this bill that more moratoriums could pop up in other watersheds, and that's something that they have said they're very concerned about. But this moratorium has been in place for almost 10 years, and currently there are only two, moratorium-specific watershed-specific moratoriums in the state, for the Buffalo River Watershed, and then the Lake Maumelle Watershed, which provides drinking water for a lot of central Arkansas.
So how does this version, differ than the ones that lawmakers have pushed in the past that would do the same thing?
Yeah, so there have been kind of three versions of this bill that have circulated during this legislative session. The first was introduced at the very beginning of the session, and that would have immediately revoked the existing moratoriums if it, went through the entire legislative process and went into law. This version has been changed a couple of times, but what the current version would do is that if it passes, it would go into effect in 2026 on January 1st, and then the agencies would have 90 days to get approval from the Arkansas Legislative Council for that moratorium. It would have to go through the rulemaking process again. The previous version of Senate Bill 290 basically would have only given them 90 days from approval, similar to this one, but it also would have required them to get approval from the Arkansas, from the legislative, from the Senate Agricultural Committee and the House Agricultural Committee, in contrast to the Arkansas Legislative Council, which is where most rulemakings get their approval. So it would have been a different rulemaking process. But when they revised the bill a few weeks ago, they changed it back to the Arkansas Legislative Council. But the bill text says that it would give the Legislative Council a little more power to say, no, we're not going to approve that moratorium.
So Governor Sarah Sanders is pro-agriculture, as all governors are, but does she think this is a good idea to remove this moratorium?
So she has not said specifically whether she supports it or not. However, her Department of Agriculture Secretary and her Department of Energy and Environment Secretary have been in support of this moratorium. The reason, kind of prelude to this legislation, last year, the Department of Energy and Environment and the Department of Agriculture promulgated rules that would have made this moratorium permanent, because under current E&E rules, the moratorium is technically temporary, and the only reason it's still on the books is because of a kind of a loophole in the language that got put in there when it was first put into E&E rules about 10 years ago. And so during this most recent round of rulemaking, they tried to make that moratorium permanent. And they have to get approval from the governor's office before they promulgate those kinds of rules. Those rules ended up kind of getting held up at the end of last year before the session. So they haven't actually gone into effect yet. They haven't been approved by the Legislative Council yet. But what Sarah Sanders has said is that she does not support anything that doesn't protect the Buffalo River Watershed. She has not said specifically whether she supports this legislation, but she has made it clear that she wants to protect the watershed in her public statements.
So what does the Arkansas Farm Bureau say about why it supports this legislation?
Yeah, so as I kind of said before, the basis of their opposition to this is this right to farm idea. You know, that agriculture should be allowed to be where it wants to be, if that makes sense. You know, they're also very concerned about the spread of additional moratoriums. Nutrient pollution is an issue for agricultural communities and in waterways around agricultural communities, and that's just kind of a byproduct of agriculture. And I think the concern from those groups is that if, say, more pollution pops up in another waterway where agriculture is a big part of the local economy or whatever, that might end up happening in one of those watersheds. That has been an example that has been brought up repeatedly by Senator Blake Johnson, who is the Senate sponsor on this bill.
So what do environmentalists or environmental groups say about this? They have come to the hearings to speak in opposition.
Yes, they have been very, very stridently opposed to removing this moratorium. You know, there are a variety of concerns when it comes to removing the moratorium. The Buffalo River Watershed is a big tourism driver for the state. It is the Buffalo River is the only national river in the state, and it has a lot of people that come to visit it. I think that there are people that are concerned that it would impact tourism. But for the environment groups specifically, you know, I kind of mentioned it already, there are concerns about nutrient pollution and runoff pollution from CAFOs, or for lack of a better phrase, hog farms, which is what the moratorium is targeted at, is hog farms. You know, they are worried about the runoff from that. And for those that have been familiar with what's been going on in this watershed, you know, 10, 15 years ago, there was a swine farm that came into the watershed called CNH Hog Farms. And the environment groups say that caused pollution within the watershed and that impacted water quality. And they are concerned that could happen again if the moratorium is lifted.
Well, we will leave it there for now and see where